edition of Devout Deism. I am your host, David Robertson. Thank you so much for being a part of the program, for sharing it with your friends, for getting involved. Today I wanted to talk about something it's a phrase that I have coined, I guess, a long time ago, and I continue to use it. It's very relevant for, deists in general, as far as usage. Not that we are, but I think many of you will understand my frustration when I talk about this. I want to use a couple definitions here real quick. Institutionalized. If someone becomes institutionalized, they gradually become less able to think and act independently because they have lived for a long time under the rules of an institution. Of course, you've probably heard this a lot when it comes to prison inmates. Prison inmates, over the course of time, become institutionalized. They become afraid to leave the institution. They become afraid to have the freedom. Well, I think in a lot of ways, that's what institutionalized is. You are afraid to have the freedom to think on your own. The institution very well could be a house of God. If that house encourages or demands conformity in belief or thought or behavior, one could very easily become institutionalized in that house. So being that a house of God is a religious institution, I've come up with the following phrase: religiously institutionalized. And what that is to me, this is more or less a term that kind of defines those who have been a part of a certain religion for so long, or I guess adhered to restrictive doctrine for so long, that they, I guess they're less able to think or act outside of their house of God or doctrine, because they've lived for a long time under the rules of that institution. Simply put, going outside of that doctrine or that house of God is scary. Thinking outside of that house of God or that doctrine is scary. It's religiously institutionalized. So, what we understand here is that deism is something that you eventually find. It's not something, I would say it's rare that people grow up as deists. Because it's about knowledge. You cannot really be a deist unless you have a substantial amount of context, unless you have learned about history, unless you've learned about the world around you. The uneducated would have a very hard time being a deist because they don't have points of reference. So if they grew up Christian and then they're having a hard time understanding what deism is about, that would be an example, I guess, of being religiously institutionalized. Or somebody who has, maybe grown up in a religion that's very oppressive. And then you're trying to talk to them about deism. The idea itself would be scary. Once again, another example of religiously institutionalized. And I encourage you to use that term, by the way, because I think it will help people understand their groupthink, if you will, or the fact that they're not open to new ideas. They have become religiously institutionalized, and therefore they're not willing to even accept or hear another's point of view. And with that in mind, I want to read something to you. I posted this to my friends and family, which kind of, illustrates kind of where I come from when it comes to deism. One of the things that I find, people will often ask me questions, but I understand, throughout, our friendship or whatever, sometimes they'll get angry or upset because of ideas that I'll bring up, because once again, being religiously institutionalized, they have a hard time accepting some of my perspective, I guess, when it comes to religion. So this was one of those deals. I just had a conversation with somebody, and they were asking my input, and I was like, I don't even want to talk about it. Because you're just going to get angry, and I don't want that for you. It's fine. I'm glad that you believe what you believe. Everybody should believe in something, and you should definitely stand for something. But I didn't want to make him angry, just on the premise that I thought that, I guess, his point of view was a little misguided. So I just opted not to talk about it, and then he got upset because I didn't want to talk about it. So I posted this, and I wanted to read this to you because I think a lot of you will be able to connect with this. So here it is. I must admit and apologize for my lack of desire to discuss religion at times. It's not personal, it's more frustration than anything. As usually happens among others in conversation, theology will often rear its ugly little head. People talk about church or their religious holidays. In fact, it is often this one very topic which confuses people when I say I pretty much only celebrate the holidays for the sake of my child's happiness. The next question is usually asking about my religion, and the speculations are often varied. Ironically enough, in all my years, I have never had a single person guess the faith or the reason I personally do not hold these occasions near and dear. So instead of asking me why, ask yourself the following question. So many people throughout history are celebrated for both their achievements and their actions, having changed the course of mankind altogether. And both their achievements and their actions were due in great part to their personal faith. Have you ever wondered how their faith, having played such an enormous role, can go ignored by those who wrote history? An example of this would be that of Ben Franklin, who decided that thunder and lightning were not the wrath of God, as was popular belief back then, but instead a natural phenomenon which could be understood if mere observation and reason were applied. So he set out to understand, and by doing so discovered electricity. Other examples of what I speak include people like Abraham Lincoln, Aristotle, Cicero, Ethan Allen, George Washington, Isaac Newton, James Madison, John Locke, Leonardo da Vinci, Mark Twain, Neil Armstrong, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, Voltaire, and so many more. All men revered throughout the ages as men of vision and strong conviction, and every single one a devout deist. Yet it is the one faith that schools won't teach you about. It's the one faith often ignored when it comes to religious debate. You won't even find it in many books that cover theology. And because of the unfamiliar name, people will often confuse it with something like atheism or just invent something about it instead of researching. Are you asking yourself why yet? Well, I can't be certain as to the why. I sure do have my suspicions. Throughout history, deists have been extremely bold, deep thinkers and doers. Our faith requires us to question with boldness everything, then look for a cause and effect with reason and observation. Our faith requires us to gather information and consider all sides before making rash decisions or biased conclusions. Finally, our faith requires that we recognize everyone in every position as equals, and that we are born with certain unalienable rights which are not to be revoked or governed by another. Oddly enough, throughout history, this is the same type of person which no authority appreciates and rarely tolerates. This is the person who would look at a dictator and know that what they were doing was wrong. The same type who would also hear the statements provided by authority and question the validity of the statement. The same type of person who strives for more than what a governing body says is enough. I think this defines bold, and many of you would concur that I fit into this category. Do you want to know why so many are never exposed to deism? It's because throughout history, deism has been considered the religion of intellectuals and reserved for the educated. It's not that anyone is keeping anyone else from it. It's just that deism is usually discovered through vast amounts of research by those curious enough to seek it out, by those bold enough to question what would drive such amazing men like Cicero, Isaac Newton, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, or Ben Franklin, and those who were bold enough to understand the difference between giving yourself to God and giving yourself to a church. This evidenced by the fact that so few, even in school, are oblivious to its existence. To understand deism is to understand yourself in the world in which you live. To understand deism, you must be bold and willing to question everything, including authority. On the other hand, to ignore deism is to be common or ordinary, as by doing so requires nothing of you, and in turn you will have changed nothing, which is exactly what most people are more inclined to do, and exactly what any authority would wish upon you. It's a choice. It's about setting yourself free, or remaining exactly where you are today. So why don't I talk about religion, or better said, my religion, with too many folks? Because they don't have the context, because they have never been exposed. It's not their fault, I know, but imagine trying to teach Christianity to someone who had never been exposed. It would take a little more than a 20-minute discussion to really give it any kind of justice. So how So how I can give someone who has never been exposed the appropriate information in a limited amount of time when the facts remain that few will do anything with the information provided. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it most of the time. Instead, I share in pieces and fragments, merely providing the breadcrumbs necessary for those willing to follow them. The bold will find them. Those who are not will quickly be distracted by the shiny thing and move on in their daily lives. The irony is that deism is well over 400 years old. If you have so far been unaware, you should ask yourself why you've been kept out of the loop. If knowledge is power, then that means many have been rendered powerless. Their minds built into a prison. It's like they are locked up without outside contact, yet having the key in their pocket but being afraid to check it. It saddens me deeply that so many people embrace the shackles placed upon them. The religiously institutionalized are the best example of this. I see deism as the sun to the person having spent their life in the dark. It's extremely difficult to open their eyes. One must first want to open their eyes, then open them slowly as to let them adjust. But once they are open and they step away from the dark, they will finally be able to truly live. Deism, derived from deus, the Latin word for God, the belief that reason and observation of the natural world are sufficient to determine the existence of God, accompanied with the rejection of authority as a source of religious knowledge. This is my faith. This is my religion. And that kind of boils it down, ladies and gentlemen. That is deism to me. And that's what I share with my friends and family. I hope that letter has helped you. If you have questions, comments, please leave them. Subscribe to the channel if you like it. Like the videos you like. Dislike the ones you don't. This has been another edition of Devout Deism. We'll see you next time.